What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Soul Surplus Podcast. This is episode 9. I am your host, Wes Pendleton, and I'm here with my co-host, John Smythe.
Yo.
Smythe, how you doing, man?
Good, man. I'm glad to be in the new location.
Yeah. We are recording live from the new office, so you might hear some road noise going on behind us. There's actually like this massive construction company that literally is right down the street, so there's like loud trucks coming through here pretty much on the regular. So we haven't had a chance to treat the office yet, but hopefully within the next week or so we'll be able to get that done, man. But it's good to have you up here, man. We usually record virtually, so it's nice to actually be sitting face to face to record, man.
Absolutely.
Yeah, man. So what are we discussing today?
So today we're talking about drum programming. There's a few different ways to program drums. So we'll be talking about breaks and programming individual sounds.
Dope.
So first, I think this is probably a good one for you because like we just listened to some of your some of the tracks you did a few years ago, and those drum breaks were pretty crispy. I really enjoyed those.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
So what would you say you prefer more, sampling breaks or programming sounds?
Well, I've always tended to do both. Okay. I usually don't do one or the other. I mean, every now and again, like I'll just find a break it's just that good. Like the kick is pretty much exactly where I want it to be. And the snare is just kind of like right in the pocket. But I tend to do both pretty much in all of my programming. There's never a time that I'm just laying a break. I'm usually putting on at least like a snare or another kick underneath.
Okay, that's pretty cool. At first, when you said both, I thought you meant like on one track you'll do programming, but on another track. But you mean simultaneously?
Nah, no, you're right.
Okay.
So one track there'll be the break, by itself, and then I'll go back and I'll add, my own programming on top of it. And it's usually like it depends on I usually do that when the track is a little bit more hard hitting.
Okay.
Just because I want the snare, maybe the snare and the sample is a little light.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll add a snare, that has a little bit more bottom to it. So, but pretty much, I'm usually doing both in any track that I do.
Nice. Yeah, I find myself, depending on the project, I do like to do a lot of pop music, and what you really need those transient heavy drums.
Right.
And a lot of times breaks, depending on where you get them from, they're more texture than they are snap and punch.
Exactly. And that's my favorite part about breaks is first of all, I think your natural ear tends to gravitate towards non-quantized drums, unless it's like your typical trap drums, that pervades the hip hop landscape today.
Right.
That stuff is like super quantized, but your natural ear tends to lean more towards a natural drum kit, somebody like an actual human that's playing the drums. And so, that person can get in a really, really great pocket, but at the same time, it's still not dead on, in the way that a trap pattern would be, conducted. So
it's human.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So what drum sounds do you usually go for when you're looking at let's say individual sounds, like you're looking for kicks or snares, or maybe you're on a website, you're looking for drums. What are you usually going to go for?
I'm definitely usually going to lean more towards real drums.
Okay.
I tend not to use as many synthesized drums unless I'm doing something that's a little bit more modern. But the majority of my drums are from breaks. One of my favorite things back in the day, not so much anymore, but back in the day, man, I used to love just sitting for like 3 or 4 hours and just going through a gang of breaks and stripping the snare, stripping the hi-hat, like creating like a whole entire kit of my own, just to be able to say like, I got my own kits, you know what I'm saying?
Wow.
Went through all this, these old gospel samples, and they got all these drum breaks and kicks that nobody's ever heard of, which was a lie. I mean, it wasn't a lie, but it just wasn't true.
Yeah.
Like everybody's going through all of this stuff. You
Right.
probably heard this kick somewhere. So.
Right. That's funny. I think maybe it's just a generation thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I find myself really going for synthesized drums now.
Right. Well, you're more of like a pop producer anyway.
Yeah. So I really like the again, like the hard hitting sounds of like a 808 drum, maybe
Right.
not even like an 808 bass like we're used to referring to, but just like an 808 kick or an 808 snare.
Right. Right.
Or like a couple years ago I was really studying Prince. I was really studying MJ. So like the Oberheim DMX sounds, the Lindrum sounds, that's one of my favorite. And I think kind of like a best kept secret is the sequential circuits, Tom.
Okay.
That's what it's called.
Okay.
It's funny. It has the color of a vintage analog drum machine, but it has sort of like the snap, because it is the sequential circuits. It came out in the 80s, the Tom. It's a digital machine.
Right.
So it's just kind of funny where it falls, but it has some pretty good sounds for even like modern pop or even hip hop, you know?
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Definitely makes sense. Yeah, I mean, there are times when I'm doing, so maybe I'm doing something that has more of like an 80s vibe to it, which is like once I got towards doing projects like Vine, like a lot of that stuff is really more like an 80s sound.
Yeah.
And so I had breaks in that stuff, but then I would layer like an old keyboard snare underneath to get it that you know, underneath. Because you kind of can't get that from just a regular snare.
Yeah.
That's something that definitely comes more from digital programming, more so than the human side of things.
Yeah. And we'll get into it later. There is some processing and compression you can do, even to a regular, like a human snare, although it's not going to be as consistent as like, you know. But I do want to talk about that because there's a certain kind of snare compression that I really like. But we'll talk about that later. We're going to get to that.
Okay. And where do you, so I know you said that you like more digital sounds. Where are you usually grabbing yours from? From like Minilog and stuff like that, pretty much?
Recently, yes. But it's kind of hard to say because there's so many kits. Like I'm trying to envision my folder that I go to when it's time to program drums.
Right.
It's all over the place. Like, what was it called? The Fly Exam kit that Elvin and Daniel Steele did.
Yep.
That was one of my favorites. The Black Coffee kit. I remember those are actually the first two kits, real drum kits I ever got.
Right.
And I remember using those a lot.
You can't go wrong with Wit or Dan Steele drums.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
I think I've pretty much grabbed every drum kit that Dan has ever put out.
Yeah.
He just both of those guys are drummers.
Yeah.
So the fact that, it's just you put a drummer, but you put a good drummer and a good engineer together, guys that can actually handle both. It's a pretty dangerous combination.
Yeah. That's how classic records are made.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, as far as sampling drums, what's your process of taking a break? Let's say you want to loop a break. I don't know if that's something that you do, or maybe you chop it. I'm more of a looper guy, so I won't jump to conclusions. You want to sample a break. What do you do?
Yeah. So I'm pretty much looping it.
Okay.
But then also like I tend to actually, not as much anymore just because like there's so many tools at our disposal, but back in the day when we didn't have as much digital tools, I used to love to pitch down the actual sample just because I felt like the snare would have a little bit more body to it while still being like in the pocket a bit.
Yeah.
So like when you guys would be like, yo, how do you get your snare to like sit back in the pocket like that? That usually was what I was doing. I was slowing the sample down a couple RPMs, and it would still have like a punch to it. But the resonance was like a little wide compared to if it was faster.
Right.
So just little tips and things I used to do back in the day, that's pretty much how I would program my stuff, and I would grab that. And one of the hardest things to do too, or another one of my favorite things to do is if I found like a really, really good snare, I would actually grab it twice. So I would grab it the first time, then go back and then slow down the RPM even slower, and then grab it again, and then make like a layered snare.
Ah,
So
that's
it would
smart.
have a punch, but a nice tail on it too. You know what I'm saying? So, because you know how sometimes when you grab a snare, like if it's right in the middle of a pattern, you know, it's going to crash right into the hi-hat, or it's
Right.
going to crash right into the kick.
Right.
And so that would kind of be my trick, is I would grab it when it's fast, and I would obviously have to chop the tail really fast.
Right.
But then I would go back and re-grab it, and then, you know, there's like so much more space there.
Yeah.
And you can't even hear, you know, where I chopped the first part. So
Wow.
yeah, it's little small things. Like I didn't have a sampler, you know.
Yeah.
I was literally just recording straight to GarageBand, and then like layering my snares and then chopping them. It was the worst.
Yeah.
It took so much time.
That's tedious.
Yeah.
But it's also very manipulative. That sounds like a negative.
Yeah,
word.
right.
But it's a cool way to manipulate it. I would have never thought to take a snare and again, like slowing it down, you're taking that attack and you're kind of just smearing it
Exactly.
over a few milliseconds, and then layering the pretty much dry signal on top of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So what I would do is like I would let the actual speed snare like hit a little early.
Okay.
And then have the slower down RPM one just come like half a millisecond later.
Yeah.
So it'd be like, I can't even explain how it, but it's like, you know, that type of thing. So I used to have fun, man. I should get back to doing stuff like that. It's like, I feel like that was real sound design.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize I was even doing sound design.
Yeah. It's funny how you kind of learn what you like, and it's almost like that's the point when your creativity in that area kind of slows down.
Exactly.
You just know, all right, I really, like for me, I really like super dry drums.
Right.
That's my thing. Like keeping it dry. I used to love the big reverb because like I said, I studied like Prince and Mike and a lot of those 80s records. But for me, I just somewhere along the way, I just learned that when it's dry, it just kind of sits in front, like right in front of the listener.
Right.
You know?
Right. You know, I listened to Rock With You the other day, and it's so amazing how like a lot of that music from that era, you subconsciously put that music into electronic, but it's not. It's not electronic at all.
Right.
It's all live instrumentation,
Yeah.
but it's just the cadence, it's the BPM, the way that so that's live programming. Obviously, you know, it's a little bit different.
Right.
But maybe it has to do with. Do you think it has to do with just like the way they process the drums?
The first thing I thought, especially like with disco, I think that at least for me, because of groups like Daft Punk that kind of take that genre and they've reinvented disco into an electronic thing. It kind of you kind of relate the vibes. At least that's what I do, you know.
Right.
But you know, like those musicians on those records were so consistent.
Mm-hmm.
Those were like top of the line musicians with top of the line engineering.
Right.
It just feels as consistent as an electronic drum, but way more human.
Exactly.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
You know?
For sure.
So what kind of drums do you normally gravitate towards, like your breaks?
Anywhere from, so back in the day when I used to be like super boom bap, I used to grab a lot between like mid 60s, late 60s into like the very early 70s. And then as my production kind of grew, then I started moving closer to mid 70s and well into the 80s.
Okay.
Because even on some of those like electronic soul stuff from like the early 80s, some of those snares, like you can manipulate those enough where they would sound like a real snare, especially if you put it underneath another snare.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's pretty much, I would say, you know, back in the day it was like late 60s to early 70s, and then as I progressed, most of my stuff came from like 77 and up.
Okay.
Yep.
It's funny. I just had two thoughts about how a lot of those drums in the 80s, those drum machines, like the ones I named, the Linn drum, the Oberheim, those are samples of real drums.
Exactly. Yep.
So they kind of fall in a sweet spot. But I also, as you name those eras, when I think of 60s, I think of that Motown ring.
Yeah.
When I think of 70s, I think of that really fat thud.
Exactly. Yep.
And then when I think 80s, I think of that electronic, like you said, that psh,
Yep.
you know, that super compressed, you know.
Yep.
It's funny when it comes to breaks, I don't dig for breaks. I really don't even dig at all. I just like to listen to music.
Right.
But when it comes to breaks, I just find that I'm usually just looking for something dry.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like having reverb on drums, like when I'm programming or when I'm making a song.
Right.
Because I want to be able to do that myself if I want to.
Right.
You know? So, of course, like the drier stuff is usually the stuff in the 70s. Like you said, the late 70s. I've even sampled some 80s stuff. It's funny how those drum what's it called? Those machines like the 808 and the 909.
Right.
A lot of that stuff sounds different coming off vinyl.
It does.
It takes on a different character.
Yep.
I made a track yesterday, and it was a sample. It sounded like an 808, but the way it was compressed, coming through the speakers, you could tell it was sampled off vinyl. It just did something to that break, and then I layered modern sounding drums over it. It's really cool.
Yeah. I really want to hear that.
Yeah.
The one thing that what is it about the clean sound that motivate? Like what is it about that sound that drives you in that general direction? Because I think Elvin is kind of like the same too. It's weird because he is so good at getting something really clean and distorting it, but still keeping it clean.
Right.
Like I still don't know how he does that. Because anytime I'm adding distortion, it's got like a crazy tail on it.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing maybe it's hardware, you know?
Partly. It's also the kind of distortion. I would say the reason why I like those really clean, hard-hitting drums, which is kind of what I went for on the Power Punch pack that we recently put out,
which I've been using incessantly.
Oh, word!
Since they came out, yeah, man, they're really, really good.
Yeah. Because I don't really do trap music that much, but I still like to draw on the energy of it, and a lot of the energy in trap music is hearing that snare, the way that it cuts through,
right,
and the way the kick punches through that mix. I like to use that in different genres like pop or like maybe a soul record, like a indie kind of thing,
right.
Just because I used to be into the kind of drums that were really warm, because I also come from like a soul lo-fi background, as you guys know. But I would compare my tracks and they wouldn't really hit the same as other tracks that I liked. And I noticed the difference was that I love to tune my snares low, or at least I used to.
Right.
But it just wasn't hitting the same. So I try to incorporate like the trap hi-hats and the trap snares, or sounds that just aren't so overly warm when I'm trying to go for that energy.
Right.
Of course, when it's time to do something a little more laid back or a little more soulful, then I love to draw on that really warm sound.
Right.
But yeah, as far as programming the modern drums to add warmth and grit, I think the trick is not to do too much, but to program it as if, kind of like what we talked about, like it's coming off vinyl.
Right.
We have a way of exaggerating that effect through plugins, where like only if you're listening to, if you don't take care of your records, then yeah, it's gonna be super noisy and it's gonna be like crazy pitch fluctuation.
Right.
And we like to exaggerate that when we recreate it with plugins.
Right.
But I think the key to taking those drums and making them sound naturally warm is to just be subtle with it.
Right.
So like, how would this drum break from a machine sound? in a song when it's stripped away, right? Like all the other instruments are stripped away. Maybe it's just a break, and it's a well-recorded analog record.
Right.
There's gonna be a little bit of grit, just a little bit of hair, and it's gonna be glued together. Yeah, it's kind of hard to describe because you want to keep the glue. And by the way, glue is a word that we used on the last podcast about compression.
Right.
It just kind of describes a way a record or maybe like an instrument bus kind of has a way of sticking together and sounding like it's one thing.
Exactly. Yep. Which is mad hard to do when you're programming. Like a lot of times, especially if you have drums from a whole bunch of different places.
Yeah.
The glue is like one of the hardest things to do, and that's why like compression is so important because that's really going to be the thing that brings them together.
Exactly.
Carry on. I'm sorry. I apologize.
Well, no, but that's a good point though, because a lot of times, at least for me, I don't want that much glue on electronic drums because if I'm using those drums, most of the time, I want those drums to hit as hard as they can.
Right.
So I'll use parallel compression, which will add a little bit of glue, but it's not overtaking like the color of the drums. Mm-hmm. You know. So yeah, it's kind of a thing you want to ease off and not overdo because then it just sounds it sounds weird if you're like putting crazy amounts of distortion and compression.
Right.
You know, then it just sounds like it just kind of doesn't work to my ears, you know?
You know who, and this is the thing that I still to this day, it just proves that these guys they're just the greats. Like when you go back and you listen to like an old Primo beat, go back and listen to like an old Dilla beat, Madlib, and definitely like Pete Rock, right? Uh-huh. More so than even Ninth. Like Ninth's drum programming definitely sounded more like he was pulling from a bunch of different places, which is fine because a lot of that, you know, like definitely influenced me when I was first starting.
Yeah,
I was influenced a lot by Pete Rock, but the way Pete Rock would program his hi-hat with the snare, I still to this, it's the weirdest thing. No compression, and it's just like this. It's, you know, you guys can't see this, but I'm interlocking my hands, and still to this day, it's just like, is it that he picked the right snare, or is it the cadence of the hi-hat? You know what I'm saying? It's just like that snare, that hi-hat would hit just at the right time, right before the snare, for it to sound like it was just one sound. And still to this, it's still baffling to me, you know?
Yeah. I can't even really say that I've paid attention to that because whenever I listen to Pete Rock, the bounce is so crazy. I'm just in the zone, like about to break my neck. Mm-hmm.
Facts.
But I do think that contributes in a way because it feels right.
Right.
And then you lock in and it sounds right.
Exactly.
You know? It's funny you mentioned Primo too, because
it's your favorite producer.
That's my favorite producer.
Just so everybody knows.
DJ Premier.
Smythe is 24 years old and his favorite producer is DJ Premier. I've never heard or seen anything like it.
DJ Premier is over twice my age.
Yeah.
No, man. Premier just does it right. Him and Beat Miners. Shout out to the Beat Miners, man. I know that's up your alley too, because those drums are all the way tucked in the pocket.
Facts.
With the most amount of dirt on them.
Yep.
It's like they're filtered off, but like they're just knocking, yo.
Exactly.
Yeah. The 90s, it was just different drum programming back then. Because I think what contributed to that kind of glue was also the format they were recording in. Like even Dre back in the day, like the first Chronic had that glue on the drums. A lot of the stuff was breaks.
Right.
But when you move on to Chronic 2001, then you kind of get that. I think you could only describe it as Dre. It's like they're samples, but they knock like digital drums.
Right.
Because they're I don't know what he used, but it sounds like kind of the era back then when you would get the drums on the hard drive. It would be like these are the these are the Dr. Dre sounds, or I had a Dr. Dre drum back in the day.
Yeah, you definitely stole them, Jones.
This was like 2004, man. Again, I don't steal drums anymore.
He never steals drums, guys. Don't listen to him. He's never stolen drums.
I've never. Hey, shout out stolen drum.
Speaking of which, yo, have you heard his new kit? The Slappy Drums kit?
There's a new one?
No, I mean, have you heard the Slappy Drums kit?
Oh, yes. Oh, I have it.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Now, you want to create some drums that got some glue?
Yeah.
Those drums.
Yeah.
Holy crap.
Yeah. It's like when you go through them, it sounds like they all work with each other.
Exactly. Yeah, man. Yeah.
Sometimes though,
I can't wait. I can't wait to tell everybody like what we're doing together.
Oh yeah.
It's gonna be so much fun.
Yo, like but using those drums, yo, when I hear how he uses those drums,
yeah,
I'm like, man, I can't do this.
Yeah. That dude has like an unbelievable cadence and pattern, like the way he uses drums. I can't even hear that stuff.
Yeah.
Let alone even try to mimic it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Everybody has their own way of doing it. It's funny how you can hear it in different people, like, oh, that's stolen drums. Oh, that's Daniel Steele.
Right.
Oh, that's Wit,
Mm-hmm.
So I know this is another topic that may be as controversial as compression. What do you start with first?
When I'm programming?
Well, I'm talking about making a song. Do you start with drums?
I always start with drums.
Okay.
Always.
I know drummers that start with the actual music.
Really?
Like the bass or the sample. I don't get that.
Yeah, I tend to so like when I would sample heavy back in the day, I would hear the sample first, and that would kind of inform the way that I was going to go with the drums.
Mm-hmm.
And then every now and again you'll have that and you're good to go, but then like something happens and like the sample doesn't work out the way you want. And so because you didn't hear, like, it's so weird how like the way that you heard the sample is because of the way it informed the way you were going to do the drums.
Right.
If the sample doesn't work, then you have to trash the drums and start all over again.
Yeah.
That's the worst thing ever. Because I've literally sat there and tried to force it, and it never works ever.
Yeah.
And it's just like, Wes, you know that this is not going to work. Get rid of the BPM that you were going to use. It's not going to happen. Just start all over as if this didn't happen.
Changing that BPM is always a game, yo.
Yeah, man.
I don't get in that trap as much because 90% of the time I'm not sampling.
Right.
So and I start with drums first as well.
Yeah. Did you hear that little soft flex from Smythe? I don't get into that as much because I'm usually not sampling.
That was definitely a soft flex. And I was like,
I play all my instruments, so I don't know what you guys are doing, but I don't have to sample because I'm an amazing instrumentalist and musician.
Soul Surplus, baby. Yo, I've actually sampled Soul Surplus. When I do sample,
you should.
I sample Joel.
Yes, I sample Joel probably like 90% of the time.
Yeah.
And then what I take from you is I actually, one of my favorite things to do with your guitar licks is to take all the top out and then throw mad amounts of reverb on them joints and make it like super drenched.
Yeah.
And then make it wide so it fills the track, but you kind of still can't hear the guitar that well.
Right.
It's a way of, and that's also another thing that I do. Say like if I'm not getting any glue in the drums, I'll take like a dissonant, guitar sound or something like that, or whatever sound. But since we've been doing Soul Surplus stuff, I've been using a lot of stuff from your guitar packs to do it. So I'll take it and I'll throw it underneath, and it kind of gives the feel that it's a break when it's not.
Yeah, that's dope. So yeah. We talked about compression last week and what it does to drums. So maybe we don't have to talk about compression specifically, but I do want to know maybe typically what does processing drums look like for you? Let's say you have a breaker or programmed drums and you're mixing a song. What kind of treatment are you putting on those drums? What's your process?
So the easiest way for me to get a fullness in my drums is to place the drums in the mix in the same exact way as if I was sitting at a set. I actually taught a class last year, a 6-part class on production it was a class of like 8 or 9 guys. And one of the things I told them was, when you're doing drums, one of the things I like to do is to set my drums in the mix using pan in the same way that if you were sitting at a set. So your snare tends to be, if you're right-handed, the snare is going to tend to be panned just to the left, just a little bit. And then the hi-hat is panned even more to the left. And then your toms are just kind of like all over the place, right? And then your kick is just dead down the middle.
Yep.
And you'd be surprised at how much just doing that and setting those things will allow you to not have to like throw mad amounts of compression on something or have to cut certain frequencies so they're not colliding and everything like that. Just those little techniques. And when you do that, it plays a trick on your ear and it makes you think that the drums are actually wider than they are. But yeah, so pretty much like the kick, I tend not to do too much with the kick outside of taking a lot of the top off. I'm not really like a high part of the kick producer. I hate the high part of the kick. I like the punch thump. You know what I'm saying? So I'm cutting everything all the way down to like 500.
That's a struggle for me.
Really?
I don't know where I stand with that one. That's always tough.
But you do pop music though. I don't do pop music. So you need the top of that kick. I don't, you know what I'm saying? So and especially so what I do is like my favorite thing to do, this is why I love playing with John, right? So John will come in and John will lay bass. I'll take all of the top off the kick. Like I'll have it all the way down to like 275. But I'll have all the highs from John's bass line still there. So it kind of plays this trick on, it kind of just plays this trick on your ears where it'll make it sound like that the kick is punchy. Yeah. When there's like literally no punch in it, it's just all thump.
Yeah.
But other than that, I tend to take a bit off the top for my hi-hats too. And then my snare, pretty much, I usually tend to leave it as is, but every now and again I'll throw like a little stereo on the snare to make it just a little wide.
Right.
But yeah, that's pretty much, my go-tos as far as, my techniques for processing my drums.
Yeah, I really like how panning the drums can really help in stereo image, just in a mix in general. Because depending on the song, maybe you have a song and there's not a lot of instruments. It's sort of a struggle sometimes to create that stereo image.
Right.
Because it's like, all I have is kick, snare, hi-hat, bass, and a sample and vocals. All those are things that could just go down the middle.
Right.
So the drums is a good place to start with creating a wide stereo image.
Mm-hmm.
Even studying rock music pretty much from the start, a lot of that stuff was done in studios. The live rooms are not just one-dimensional, like down the middle kind of things. They're putting room mics everywhere.
Exactly. Yep.
So they're creating that space. So the drums really set the tone for everything. So I do also want to talk about the difference between knock and tuck.
Okay.
So maybe, of course we could both speak on this. But I know knock was definitely my focus for the power punch kit.
Right.
And
it shows.
Yeah, that was my biggest goal, was to make sure these drums, when you put them in your song or you're programming them,
right, they're gonna kick you right in the face
through an iPhone.
Yep.
Hear them through an iPhone. Yep. And that was good. Like I listened to the demos for that kit through my iPhone, and I could feel it. I could hear the kick. So part of the way I did that, well, I'll start from the beginning, making those knock, and you guys could probably use these tips even if you're using your own drums, or if you want to add more knock to the power punch stuff, probably won't need to.
Oh, another soft flex.
Soft flex.
Another soft flex. Hey guys, just so you know, while you need some punch, you probably won't have to use it on the power punch because I already added it. You got it?
Is a soft flex plus a soft flex a hard flex?
Kind of low key.
So I'm Hulk Hogan right now.
Exactly.
Brother.
Oh my gosh. No. We're gonna lose so many listeners off of this joke. They're gonna be like, these dudes are so prideful, arrogant.
Just playing though. So the way I program, let's say a kick, for example, starting with the synth, really just creating a kick sound by turning that decay all the way down so you get a sound.
Right.
So I ran it through my analog chain, and at that point it's all about getting the color and the tone. So those drums, before they were edited, they were actually really noisy. Because I ran them through an 1176.
Okay.
And at extreme settings, like let's say you turn that threshold all the way down, or really the threshold on the 1176 is kind of just the input knob.
Right.
But let's say you crank that and you're getting a lot of hiss. I had to pretty much gate that stuff off. But what it was doing was adding all of that like transformer color.
Okay.
To the kicks and the snares and everything. Running it through the tube EQ that I have, which adds a lot of massive low end to the kicks. Or for the snares, adding like 3K.
Right.
I know there's a few snares in there where I guess this is where I can tell you guys about my snare compression trick, which is the all buttons in mode, like I've talked about a few times on the podcast.
It's like your favorite thing to do.
Absolute favorite, because it's so destructive. It matches my personality. I'm not a destructive person, but I like intensity. Man, I feel like I already struck. I had 3 strikes on this podcast already. I'm out.
Yeah. You are a low-key wildin'.
But yeah, pressing the all buttons in, you do super fast attack and super fast release. That's how you get that psh
right
on your snare, because again, you're taking that transient and you're making the transient just as loud as the tail.
Exactly.
So you're on snares like that, you're losing a little bit of attack.
Right.
So I made sure to balance like the 1 or 2 really splat kind of snares with it's definitely way more snap kind of snares.
Right.
So after running that stuff through the analog gear, then it's the in the box processing, which was mostly Transient Designer.
Okay.
And the trick to that is the Transient Designer I use, you can split it up into frequencies. So you can turn down or turn up the attack on from 20 to 200 hertz.
Right.
So maybe you have a snare, you want a lot of thud in the low end.
Right. Yep.
You can just turn up that attack between 20 hertz and 200 hertz, or you can go from 200 to 1,000 or anywhere in between. Then of course all the way up to 20,000.
Right.
But that Transient Designer, and then also taking the sustain and turning that down just to get it really tight. That was definitely monumental in the sound and getting those drums to really hit how they do. So it was a combination of color, just enough color, definitely not super distorted, but it was getting that color, but then mostly getting the knock through the EQ and the transient designing. You can also even use a transient designer like that as an EQ.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you have a kick and all you really want is you feel like that 30 hertz to like 150 is feeling kind of flabby. So you can just take the sustain, turn that all the way down so your low end is tight.
Right.
But then you take the attack and you crank it.
Right.
And then you still have your kind of like that low mid range of the kick and the high end is not snapping with the rest of the kick,
Right.
but you're just getting that punch in the bottom.
Gotcha.
Which is really cool. So, that's just some.
We're sitting here in the office, and I can see Zari out the corner of my eye. He's like watching and listening. Like, I'm about to try all that stuff next time I get up on.
It's a plugin called multi-trans or multi-transient by Audio Assault.
Right.
And you can control the transients of the different frequencies. So once I got that, I think Elvin put me onto that.
Yeah, that sounds like something that Elvin would do.
Yeah.
Or use.
Yeah. So that's just some tips to get your drums to knock.
Well, I definitely want to talk about tuck.
Yeah, I was about to ask you because,
that's like my favorite. That's like my favorite thing. So the easiest way to get tuck, really honestly, is to just cut all of those high frequencies out, right?
Mm.
So now you still want your snare to punch through just a bit. And so the easiest way to do that, actually for me, is to actually cut a lot of the bottom out. So, but also not to get like you don't want to get like a thick snare to you know what I'm saying? Because a thick snare just doesn't work as well in tucking.
Right.
But if you get like a real snappy pop snare, you can actually take all the bottom out and then use a lot of that higher frequency to cut through the mix while actually bringing the gain down so that it's not punching like all the way through. You know what I mean? So that's like one of my favorite things to do. And then obviously just, side chaining helps out a lot with that too. There's a way that basically the way that that I know that the side chain is working perfect is specific, not really specifically with the snare, but with the hi-hat. So if I hear the hi-hat on the downbeat, then I know that my side chain is working.
Okay.
Because when it pumps, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear the hi-hat in that moment. But I want to hear it it's actually the upbeat, excuse me. Is it
right.
Yeah, it's actually the upbeat.
I know what you're talking about, yeah.
So but when that sample is compressed, I don't want to hear the hi-hat. Like at all. You know what I'm saying?
Wow.
So yeah, there's like little tricks that I had to learn how to do just because like I didn't have an ASR. Those old machines would just put your drums like in the perfect place. MPC, the way that your drums would sound coming out of MPC, still to this day, you cannot duplicate it digitally. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Period. So I used to listen to all that old stuff and be like, why do their drums sound so good? And it's like, because they processed them Jones through an MPC.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Through an old trash equalizer. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That you're not going to be able to do anything with that using GarageBand, my friend. You know what I'm saying?
So I have a question about hi-hats.
Yeah.
And the hi-hat tuck. So the first track that comes to mind is No More Parties in LA.
Okay.
So how do you get that hi-hat? It almost sounds like it's just turned down, like it's really low. But it's almost like the drums are tucked, but then also the hi-hat is tucked underneath the drums, if that makes sense.
Well, I also do, I tend to, and I think even going back to, we were talking about Pete Rock earlier. So one of my favorite things about Pete Rock is like, there's a clip on the internet that a billion people probably at this point have seen.
Love is a Battlefield? That one? The Love is a Battlefield one?
I don't remember what the name of the particular joint is, but he's literally showing you like how he programs on the MPC.
Okay.
Right? And when he's doing his hi-hats, he's got like the perfect
I've seen
cadence
that.
with his finger.
Yeah.
But if you're actually listening to it, because the attack is not exactly the same, it's what it allows it to have a little bit more bop on top of the tempo. So I know for myself, a lot of times, like, I have a bad habit of doing this, of just like playing the hi-hat and then going back and then editing it, or quantizing it afterwards.
Yeah.
I'll take a lot of attack off of like the stuff that I don't want to punch all the way through.
Yeah.
But the best part about doing that is if you have drums that have been really sound designed, the higher the attack, the more that there's like the way that you hit your drumstick on a snare when you're really hitting it is different than when you're trying to keep it quiet. So,
Yeah.
but if you just have like a regular hi-hat and then you try to bring the attack down, like, let's talk about our drums. Like, we're not throwing a whole bunch of different variation in the sound design. If you bring the attack down, it's just going to be quieter.
Right.
Whereas then if you use, let's say, something from Native Instruments, like on Complete,
Yeah.
they've designed that hi-hat to be hit on multiple points on the hi-hat and in multiple different variations. So hard on the outside, soft,
Yeah.
halfway open. Like, they've done all that. So when you bring that attack down, it literally sounds like somebody's literally just letting the drumstick just like kind of just land on the hi-hat.
Yeah.
So when I really want to have a lot of variation in my hi-hat, I tend to go to like Complete.
Yeah.
Because just their regular studio kit, I mean, you could really, really go in with mic placement and stuff like that.
Oh, wow.
Just in the stuff that they, like, I could literally sit there for 4 hours just on the snare.
Right.
And Complete. So, and that's just a regular studio kit. It's nothing crazy about it, but you can tune it. It's just perfect, man. So shout out to Native Instruments.
Yeah, that reminds me of my favorite hi-hats that I always use. You might not believe this. It's from this kit from That Sound called 1985. And it's all 80s type drum sound. So that real big echo, reverb, huge drum sound. But they have different variations of it. And they have one called 1985 USA Custom Dry. So it's the same sounds, just with all the reverb taken off.
Oh, wow.
So you get that like real hi-hat sound. They're real hi-hat samples. But what I always do is I take isotope vinyl and I throw them on. Well, usually I put vinyl on like the whole drum bus.
Right.
But it's a real hi-hat sound. So when you open it up, you get that
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. You know what? Yeah. I'll show you.
Yeah, you're giving away too much secrets. Right?
Yeah. So I think we're at the point now where we can kind of wrap up with the 3 tips that we usually do.
Okay.
So we have 3 tips for programming drums. So the first one, this is what I had to learn the hard way. I think you told a story about this too. Picking high quality sounds and breaks will start you further along in getting your drums to sound how you want them to. The drums got to be right.
Right.
There's just no way around it.
Yeah.
You can hear when people are using stock drum, unless it's you. I don't know when you're using stock drum sounds. You can hear when people are using stock sounds, and there's nothing wrong with stock sounds unless there's something wrong with those stock sounds.
Right. I don't know, man, because I mean that's a yes and a no, because I've used some stock stuff that was horrible.
Yeah.
And still got them things that sound real nice.
Right.
But I mean that's a level of expertise that
Exactly.
most don't necessarily have, So that was a little soft flex. I'm sorry, guys. Forgive me.
Little soft, little baby muscle flex.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah, no, but seriously, buy good drums. That was like, even like me and Zari, like we were showing you some of like the old stuff that, from like 10 years ago.
Right.
I was horrible on drums back then. My drums
sound
were
like it.
trash back then. Seriously, man, my drums are horrible. Like that was probably like my Achilles heel. So what happened was, on a lot of my old stuff, I think the thing that really kind of caught people off guard was the way I would chop a sample, and just like the presence of the sample, the soul that was in the sample would just draw people to like, ooh, that sample is fire. But like my drums would be lacking a lot, you know what I'm saying? And so I even still think, like today, I still think that my drums are still kind of part of my Achilles heel, So like even some of the newer stuff that I tried to do, thankfully, like, Smythe kind of brought to my attention that I was, using some techniques that probably could use a little attention, and I was glad that he said that to me, because I feel like I've gotten better since we had that conversation. But it's so important. Like we listened to that new Quavo today, and it was just like the drums are like the thing that you hear the most in that record, you know. So but yeah, man, drums are just so important.
Yeah. I was just talking. We were just talking about the stock Logic sounds, and as much as I have bad things to say about them, like I remember trying to tweak them, and it's a weakness for me too, because I'm really a guitarist, you know. So my attitude going into programming drums has always been, I kind of really don't have time to do this.
Right.
Meaning like I need these to sound great right away. So let me work really hard and fast on this so they can sound as good as they can, and I can focus on the rest of the song, because that's where I'm more meticulous and I have more experience.
Right.
So this kind of actually leads into the second tip. So the second tip for programming drums set the tone for a song. So an interesting pattern or break will keep the listeners tuned in.
Very true. This is where, in my opinion, Stolen Drums is the best. Like that's really where, and the crazy thing is his samples are fire. Everything that he does is really good, but it's the pattern of his drums. He has this like super lazy cadence that has mad movement in it.
Yeah.
I've never seen anybody do anything like it, man. It's I still to this day, like for me it's always great for me to find somebody that I actually have like high amounts of respect for.
Yeah.
And he's definitely one of those guys. So for somebody to kind of come along when everybody kind of has this thing of like, you know, oh, nothing is new under the sun, and then you hear Stolen Drums take a sample and you know, you can't even put his sound in a box. He was actually on a podcast talking about that, how like people were calling his stuff lo-fi, and he was just like, I mean, yeah, but not really. And he's right. I mean, it's not really like boom bap. It's, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's just drums. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So,
and he also has the most fire tag.
Oh, that, yeah. Is that Chris? I think he said that's Chris Brown, which is like, where did you find that at?
Right.
Well, who
Chris
you
Brown
think you finna play with? It was like, and his placement.
Yeah.
When he does it, it's just like,
yeah. Tags. We'll probably talk about tags in another podcast, but honorable mention is Tay Keith.
Very true.
Tay Keith, man. First of all, yo, that dude is like taking over, and yo, you know how you get tired sometimes of certain guys. Like, you know, you'll always hear certain producers, and you're like, you know, this isn't bad, but I feel like I've heard this so many times. But every time I hear that Tay Keith tag, that drum hypes me up, yo.
Right.
I never get tired of hearing that.
True.
But yeah, I feel like I said this on another podcast, but I'll say it again anyway. The best analogy that I have for programming drums, my brother actually told me when he trashed these few beats that I sent him. And yeah, so funny. That's so funny, Harry. No, but so I sent him stuff. It was like very ambient, atmospheric. Looking back, it wasn't that good. I would have trashed myself if I sent myself that.
Right.
But he told me that drum programming was really boring, and so he said, you know, you think about it like you're drawing a face. A lot of people, when they draw a face, they'll draw eyes,
right?
Maybe draw a nose and then draw a mouth. But people forget to draw the eyebrows. People forget like the shading in the face, and,
right?
You know, like certain, you know, hair. Maybe they have like stubble. Maybe they have eyelashes.
Right.
You know, those are all the details.
I hope they have eyelashes.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I'm gonna say maybe they have stubble. They definitely have eyelashes. Yeah. But yeah, those are the details that you really need in there to keep the listener glued in and to make it really reach through the speakers, in my opinion.
Right.
So again, that includes like stuff on the upbeats, the offbeats, instead of maybe just a straight boom, boom, tip, bah. While that definitely has its place, that stuff, those straight ahead drum breaks usually work when there's other things happening around it.
Exactly.
You know? So, yeah, that was probably one of the best tips for programming I ever got because it changed how I did things. And I really started to listen again. Third time I'm saying it, listen to Michael Jackson. Want to Be Starting Something is one of the best programmed drums of all time, yo. Crazy. Or Sucker MCs by Run DMC. All of that stuff, you can kind of look at it as color. Tick, 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 tick. Like all those upbeats and everything, they just add so much color to the rhythm. It keeps it really interesting, and it keeps people moving. At the end of the day, like it's kind of what drums in a lot of genres are for, is to get everybody moving, you know?
Right.
So the last tip, maybe the most important one, drums are an important part of the song, but they have to work together with every other element in order for them to be truly appreciated.
Very true.
And sometimes you got to know when to simplify it. Sometimes you got to know when, all right, I have an arpeggiator playing 16th notes. Do I really need the hi-hats to do 16th notes?
Right.
If we already have that rhythm set in place.
Right.
There's so many ways you can look at this, but the drums have to work with everything. Like I know one of my problems when I was really into crushing drums and really into like saturating it and getting that lo-fi color is that it was really taking over too much space frequency wise. Like it was really hogging up that 200 hertz, 400 hertz space where the vocals, like if I tried to sit the vocals loud with those drums, the song would just be way too loud. It's probably clipping at that point.
Gotcha.
So it was really just having to make it work within the song. And sometimes you gotta cut stuff. Sometimes you might like, you know, that extra fast hi-hat.
Right.
But it might not work, you know?
Yeah. Very true. Very true.
So yeah, those are our 3 tips for drum programming. I don't know if you had anything on that last tip.
Not really. I mean, I think that you pretty much added everything, you know. I don't think my 2 cents is going to make, I think you kind of wrap that up really nice, put a nice bone in it.
Little soft, humble flex. I don't think my 2 cents.
Anyway, but for real, like, you know, shout out to everybody that listened to this episode. This is our first official recording in the new office, man. So looking forward to getting the sound right. You know, we'll definitely, we actually ordered like $500 worth of equipment today, and they didn't have it ready at the music store. I'm not even going to say their name because it got me super irritated. But yeah, we had to make do with what we had. So we hope that you guys dig what we talked about today. And if you have any questions about anything, please feel free to, you know, drop us a line on SoundCloud or on YouTube, or even, you know, drop us a comment on Instagram. And, you know, Smythe and I are going to be doing some pretty cool things. We had started like a question show where we asked. And
we got to bring that back.
Yeah, one of the reasons why I love this space is I want to be able to bring that back, but to be able to address it on video. Yeah, you know, so that we can talk about those things. But yeah, man, thanks again, guys. We'll catch you next week. Peace.
Peace.